Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's live presentation, Step Away from the Waterfall, You Really Can Use Agile on an ERP Project. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Jason Fair, CEO at Genesis Consulting. Jason brings over 20 years of business and industry experience implementing ERP programs to public and commercial clients. Most recently, he has worked with his clients to develop a lean and agile approach to implementing ERP that creates high-performing teams and accelerates the realization of benefits from ERP initiatives. We also have the pleasure of hearing from Mike McLaughlin, Technical Account Manager at Rally Software. Mike assists prospects and customers on agile methodologies and tools to more productively and predictively deliver projects to market. He is responsible for product demonstrations, on-site installation, coaching, support, and customer relationship management. Today's presentation will last about 50 minutes, and there will be time at the end for questions. Please submit your questions at any time in the chat box during the presentation. Also, to ensure good audio quality, please turn up the volume on your speakers or plug in headphones. Thanks again, and I'll pass it to Jason.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks everyone for attending today. We've got all kinds of great, fun, and exciting things to talk about, and so what I want to do is just kind of lay out how this conversation is going to go. One, we'll just introduce ourselves and give you a little more information about ourselves, and then we'll introduce some of the concepts around lean and agile and what that means from an ERP perspective. I'll help start to identify some of the challenges and some of the success factors that we typically see in ERP projects, and then there are different types of delivery models that we've been able to work with different customers as they go on their lean and agile journeys. Also, for those of you who haven't learned about Kanban, it is a lean concept that we are starting to see ERP customers introduce to their teams, and we'll talk about that. And then we do have a case study that I'd like to share with you regarding some of the key successes that one of our customers has been able to achieve over the past year or so by introducing lean and agile. And then at the end, we'll open it up to questions and answers. So Lauren introduced us, but what I want to do is just give you a few more tidbits about myself. I am the CEO of Genesis Consulting, and I do have over about 20 years of ERP experience. I did start as an ERP customer on SAP, and I've been implementing projects ever since. I do have a background in functional and technical skills and areas, and recently have been working in the lean and agile space and helping customers define new frameworks for their ERP implementations and looking at how they can manage portfolios better. Later in the presentation, we'll have Mike McLaughlin from Rally talk about how he is starting to see ERP customers introduce enterprise portfolio management and different types of ways to use the Rally tool in managing those types of projects. Now that you've heard a little bit about us, I'd like to learn a little bit about who's on the phone and who's on the webinar with us. So what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a poll, and Lauren is going to ask you a few questions, and we're going to see who we have in the audience. It helps me kind of tailor the conversation a little bit as we go through this. And so Lauren, if you'd like to start the poll.
Great. So the first question in our poll is, are you currently using an ERP solution at your organization? So please select the radio button that best fits your answer.
All right, Lauren, what are the results of that poll?
Great. So it looks like about 62% of the people on the call are using an ERP solution at their organization. About 40% are not. So we'll move on to the next slide. So our second poll is, if you are currently using an ERP solution, which one are you using? Oracle, SAP, PeopleSoft, other, or not applicable? Okay, and we'll skip to the results of that poll. Looks like of all the tools, SAP is the most used of the ERP solutions. And one more question just to get to know you all a little bit better. What is the level of Agile adoption at your organization? We are not sure what Agile is. We are interested in using Agile but not using it today. We have tried Agile in some of our projects. We are using Agile but it's scattered. Or we are using Agile 100% to the fullest. Okay, going to skip to the results here. Wow, it looks like pretty overwhelming. Most of the audience is using Agile, but they feel like it's scattered Agile. So they're not 100% adopted into Agile. So with that, pass it back to Jason.
Great, thanks, Lauren. So that gives me a good understanding as to where our audience stands with regards to Agile. We've got a large number of people that have great concepts and understanding and knowledge of Agile, but are trying to figure out how we can adopt that into an ERP environment. We do have some people that are looking at this from the ERP perspective, but also are starting to learn some of those concepts. So just a little bit about Genesis Consulting. We are an SAP services provider, and we do have specialties in SAP technologies with regards to implementation and project management. We also provide lean and agile coaching, and we also have a focus around overarching organizational change management and enterprise performance management. We are partners with SAP as well as with the Agile Alliance and the Scrum Alliance, and we have been able to work through those groups to continue to introduce these concepts and educate people around lean and agile. Over the past year and a half, we've been spending a lot of time helping talk about lean, talk about agile as we introduce this to the ERP space and the ERP environment. We started to develop a network of people that are sharing information, they're talking to each other, they're looking at lessons learned, they're networking and how they can continue to leverage the lean concepts and agile techniques and how they continue to improve their ERP experiences. And so we continue to add customers to this list, but we've been able to start this network of a community of interest. As we start to talk about lean and agile, we want to make sure that we're all talking about some of the key baseline information and concepts. When we talk about agile, it is a methodology or an approach that we use that's based on lean thinking. And when we talk about lean, lean is a thinking principle. It's how can we identify opportunities for improvement and how can we continue to identify ways to eliminate waste in any process that we're looking at. If we look at our ERP projects, how can we start to identify ways to accelerate the time to delivery? And we do that by introducing certain concepts. Frequent inspection and adaptation. How can we continue to look at what we're doing and continuously improve that? How can we empower our teams to be focused on self-organization? And we want team members to be accountable for the work that they are supposed to complete and the work that they do complete. We also want to make sure that we increase the rate at which we deliver product to our stakeholders. We do that through time boxing, and we do that through better estimating of our work. And then we also want to make sure that we bring our customers, our end users, our stakeholders closer into this process so that it's more of a continuous feedback loop with our customers. So when we think about the work that we do every day, we want to think about what is it that we do that is actually contributing to the end product. We want to think about the work and the tasks and the time that we spend. We want to make sure that we are eliminating non-value added work. Any work that is not actually time that we're spending on the end product, how can we eliminate that out of our day? We all know that there's things that we have to do that is just about managing the business or it's about compliance, and that's called business value added work. We know we've got to do it, but how do we minimize that or how do we reduce that? And what we want to do is focus on increasing our customer value added work, the actual time that we spend building the product that we're delivering. as we think about these types of concepts, it's really a transformation of the way that we think. We want to challenge our teams to think differently. We want them to think that what they're doing, we want them to ask themselves, why am I doing this? Why am I participating in this meeting? How does this help me get to the end product? How does this help me increase the efficiency of my day and the amount of time that I'm spending? So what's the big deal? When we look at different time studies that have been conducted over the years, when we think about the actual customer value add time that we spend in a day, it's only between 5 and 30% of our day. And so if we are able to just take, let's just say we are at 20%, let's just say that we can double that to a 40%. If you can double the capacity at which your teams are performing and at which they are actually working on customer value added activities, the actual product that they're building, you'll be able to double their capacity. So really, the challenge for us becomes how do we focus on eliminating the non-value add activities? And we do that by introducing some of the concepts of Agile. There's 5 concepts that I like to talk to customers about and how we start to introduce to our teams the ways that we can start thinking differently. Empiricism is one of them. We need our teams to be building a product so that they are accountable to deliver it, so that they can have time to introduce that and demonstrate it to their customers. By getting that ongoing feedback and building an actual product that we are delivering to our customers engages the customers to get that continuous feedback loop. Another concept is prioritization. Many times we have a project plan or we have all these different things that we have to be doing. How can we create an environment where our team members can deliver the work that they're supposed to be completing based on value? And we want them to be completing work where stakeholders have had influence in the work that we're completing, but it's also based on what's important to the business. Self-organization. We don't want to be in the business of micromanaging our team members down to every hour that they're working. We want to empower our team members to be able to manage the work that they have to get done, and we want them to figure out the best way and the most efficient way to get all of the work done within the time frame that they're given. And that leads us to time boxing. If we challenge our teams with specific time frames in the work that they have to get done, they will figure out the most efficient way to get work done. And then collaboration. We want to introduce an environment where teams are able to openly communicate with each other. They're able to express their concerns, express their ideas, and interact freely so that they can continue to get the work done. There's no stopping and starting, waiting for team members to respond to different types of events that happen during the life cycle. So for those of you who have been working on ERP projects before, you're used to the traditional waterfall methodology or approach. All the ERP solutions have typically been delivered over the past 20, 30 years using this approach. You start off in the beginning with a concept, you come up with a definition, you do some design work, you build it, you test it, and then you release it. Very successful in many areas. However, we're at the point now where our economy and our challenges that we have force us to think about how we can do these things differently. How can we increase the productivity of our teams? We have fixed constraints with resources, we have fixed constraints with funding, and we have fixed constraints with our timelines. How can we start to deliver product faster? And that's where we start to introduce the concepts of Agile. So on the second half of this diagram, you can see where we start to take a scope of a project and we break it down into iterations. We call those iterations sprints. You may be able to group several different iterations into a release that are releasing a certain capability to your customers. And then you sequence all those releases in your overall project. And we'll get into more detail about what the details are within these sprints. This is an example from an SAP project where we took the typical ASAP roadmap, the accelerated SAP implementation methodology, and we've used an Agile approach to deliver that. To walk through this quickly, we usually take all the work breakdown structure that has to be completed on a project, the 5,000 line project plans that you've typically seen and used in your projects, and we've created product backlogs. Those product backlogs are created based on the work streams, based on the business functionality that has to be delivered, and based on some of the technical dependencies for some of the development and other areas that have to be part of the overarching project. You create that product backlog, and you prioritize it and sequence it in a way that makes sense from an ERP perspective. You take those high priority items and you create your sprint backlog. You decompose the sprint backlog into tasks and activities, you plan them, and the team starts to execute their sprint. Their sprint can be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks in time. At the end of that 4-week period, we are demonstrating the capability that we built to our customers. We have a demonstration to our customers, and at that time the customers are able to provide feedback and input into what they saw during the demonstrations, and then at that time we're able to conduct a retrospection and be able to figure out how can we include and incorporate those recommendations and those changes into our next sprints, and how can we also improve as a team. How did our team work this sprint? What can we do to improve and do better next time? So it's an iterative prototype model in which we start to take functionality and capability and deliver that to our customers. So again, as a background, as we look at some of the techniques and some of the different approaches that we can introduce to our teams, we have to remember that this is a transformation of the way that we think. We need to challenge our team members to think about lean. How can we eliminate waste? How can we have our team members start to pull from the demand? We don't want to be micromanaging them. We don't want to be telling them what to do, but we want to empower them to be able to figure out what work needs to be completed and how to best complete it. And then we also want to make sure that continuous improvement and feedback loop is being exercised in all areas of our life cycle. And the way that we can do that and the way that we can accelerate those results is through some of the Agile techniques. Co-location of employees or team members is usually very effective. However, we have to be realistic that in today's environments, we have teams that are located in multiple locations, multiple time zones, in multiple countries. And how can we best manage that? There are tools, there are methods, there are techniques that you can use to create collaboration without necessarily being co-located. Self-organization and accountability is not something our team members are typically used to, but we need to start to empower them to think that way. How can our team members constantly be thinking about how can I eliminate some of the waste and ceremony that we typically see in these large-scale ERP projects? And then how can we get our customers to always be present? We want our end stakeholders to be involved throughout the entire life cycle. So as we introduce these concepts of Agile, we have to sit back and think about how can we start to look at our ERP environment and our ERP framework, and how can we start to introduce these concepts. So with that being said, there's a bunch of you that are on the call here that are familiar with Agile, but you may be familiar with it from a traditional custom application development perspective. So as we kind of migrate into the world of ERP, what does that mean? We have to think about how we look at the work differently. We are not looking at individual modules that have to be coded or programmed. We are looking at end-to-end business process functionality for an ERP product that comes delivered with integrated business functionality. With that being said, as we look at our work, instead of it being a feature set, which in traditional Agile projects is about how you break down the work into features, we have to look at it from a business process perspective. How can we take a business process from end to end and decompose that into tangible work products and work packages that we can deliver into our ERP environment? We're not talking about coding. We are talking about configuration and possibly some additional development. We want to leverage the capability and the functionality that's inherent with our ERP systems, and we want to break that down into the business decisions and the business configuration that needs to be complete. And how do we take that work and create iterative prototyping with that work? With ERP, we know that there's the complexity of business requirements. We do know that there's all different kinds of components with an integrated end-to-end business process that we have to consider. And then we have to look at how we define our work and how do we define being done. In traditional Agile projects, we say that being done with something within a sprint or an iteration means that it's production-ready code. In an ERP project, that's not necessarily the case, and that's not what we've seen. Our definition of done typically is, can I create something that I can demonstrate that demonstrates a business process or a business capability within the ERP solution? And can I conduct some type of unit test on that and move it to some type of quality assurance environment? If I can do that, that means I've been able to define the business requirements, I've been able to define the configuration, I've been able to conduct the initial prototype of it, and I've been able to test it to a certain degree. As we all know, that there's a lot of integration requirements in an ERP environment, and there's a lot of different testing that has to go on through that process. But if we're able to promote it to a QA environment, then we should be able to have the conversation with our stakeholders that says, is this what you were thinking about when we were talking about these requirements? Does this demonstrate to you the capability that it's going to look like in the future? And you've initiated the dialogue to get that feedback. On large ERP projects, there's also all these concurrent support teams. We would always include their types of tasks and activities into our overall sprint backlog and into the different tasks and activities that have to be complete. So whether it's the systems admin folks, it's the security, organizational change management and training, or quality assurance and testing, we will include all of that in the work that has to be completed. As we look at taking Agile into an ERP environment, there's a few things that we have seen. We need to make sure that people understand this is a new way to manage projects. The traditional way of building a 5,000-line project plan and building all of the resource-loaded components of things where you're trying to figure out what's going to happen 6 to 9 months from now is not necessarily how we're going to be managing the work, and it's not how we're going to be communicating to our stakeholders. So we need to, what this process will do is it will allow us to identify where we have some of the weaknesses in our processes and where we have to identify dependencies very quickly. Also, people tend to not be comfortable in this transition. They're very comfortable with what they know, and they know how to manage the large-scale waterfall projects. So as we move into an Agile environment, we have to be able to manage our team members, manage our key stakeholders as we transition into this. Also, ERP projects are all-encompassing. These projects are end-to-end business processes that touch many different areas, including external legacy systems, external vendors and customers, and we have to look at how we can manage that. This isn't about programming, it is about business processes. So how do we manage the configuration and the coding and development as we manage going forward? And I think the most complex thing about this is identifying the dependencies and all the different sequencing that we have of stories, tasks, and activities. For those of you familiar in the ERP environment, you can't just prioritize a backlog based on business value. You have to group things from an ERP perspective based on the dependencies, because there's so many different things in a sequence in which that you configure and do development that you have to keep those packages together. So tracking those dependencies and making them visible for everybody to see is extremely important as you build out your stories and you build out your backlog and you plan your release and you plan your sprints. So as we look into many of the customers that we've been working with, we've tried to gather some of the key success factors from an ERP perspective. Some of the things are summarized here. I'll highlight a few. One is that we typically recommend to folks that are looking at introducing Lean and Agile in ERP is to take a few minutes and take some time and conduct an Agile readiness or a cultural assessment. We need to look at the factors that are going to help make your Agile adoption successful. Do you have the right champions in place? Are you committed to training your team members? Are you committed to dedicating the resources that you need to dedicate in order to make these types of projects successful? And there's many different areas that you evaluate, but take some time to really take an honest look at your environment and your culture and make sure it's one that's willing to be more agile. Make sure you have an executive champion that's willing to support some type of proof of concept or pilot as you introduce these concepts on the ERP side of your house. Also, there's not any one way to do this. Every environment that we've been in, we have seen the people introduce Lean and Agile in different ways. You have to look at your culture, you have to look at the resources that you have, you have to look at the skill sets that you have, as well as the technical environment and the ERP environment that you have, and come up with a framework that works best for your organization. I also am a strong believer that there's a spectrum of agility, and that somewhere on the left-hand side of that spectrum you may be introducing the concepts, and somewhere on the right-hand side of that spectrum is when you're actually doing full-blown Lean and Agile concepts and practices. And somewhere in between is where most of the ERP projects that we work with is where they land. And they're able to optimize their teams and they're able to see the results of these types of practices immediately. And over time, they will continue to work towards the right. The point of that is just that everybody develops a different framework, and they develop a different scale of agility in which they can introduce these concepts in their organization. Finding the right product owner is extremely important. This is the person who's going to be responsible for managing the backlog, managing the work, helping the team decide how the work gets completed, as well as escalating any issues and resolving any issues with our key stakeholders. We want to make sure that that person represents the business, but also has the ability to help the team prioritize the work. A key important factor and success factor is how do we define the backlog? And one of the key questions I get all the time is, how do I start defining stories? And how do I start to build what my backlog looks like? And once we get over that hump, we're able to, I think, get teams to feel more comfortable with it. But it's extremely important to take the time up front to define the work that needs to get completed. And we want to define it in a way that is not like we typically have done before. Think of your backlog as a list of stories. Each story is basically a use case or a user acceptance scenario that you have to be able to build capability to deliver. And if we're able to think kind of backwards from that perspective, and we define all the tasks and activities and work and acceptance criteria that needs to be incorporated into the story, then that's how we define our work in our backlog. Also, we want to make sure that we don't get hung up on some of the nitty-gritty detail of the process. We are going to work through the process of an Agile adoption as you go through iteration to iteration. That's what the retrospective is for. That's what your Agile coaches are for. And that's how you will continue to improve the process, all in developing your overarching framework. Now, from an ERP perspective, we have seen multiple types of delivery models that have come to play. Based on your environment, based on the scope of the projects that you're looking at, based on the technologies and the platforms that you're introducing or you're managing, there could be different types of approaches. And these are just a few that we've seen. Many times there are organizations that want to introduce Lean and Agile, but they really don't know how to get started. Or they don't really understand what the scope of the project is. They don't have any knowledge or understanding of the technology that they're implementing because it's new to their organization. Or maybe we don't have the buy-in from our stakeholders. And so what we want to do is spend a little bit more time up front doing the planning and the requirements. And we can do that either through a typical waterfall process that you're using today, or we can do that through several iterations where we want to get the team to be building out their stories and be building out their backlog. Then we get to a point where we can sell that to the internal stakeholders, or we can get the buy-in that we need, and we can plan the project that needs to be executed. Then when it comes time to actually execute the project and build the capability, test it, and deploy it, we can do that using Agile. And this is one way that organizations have introduced this concept so that their teams feel more comfortable. One popular approach is what I like to call the Agile fall, or an iterative waterfall. But we're going to introduce the concepts of Lean and Agile, but we're going to still have different types of phase gates. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the requirements. We can do that through using Agile, and as we get to that point, we start building, we start testing. A lot of times, if we have resistors out there to the process and we have to slowly introduce this into our organization, this is a great way to start to introduce the concepts. It's a great way to start to get your team members trained on how to use Agile, and also it's a great way for us to test whether or not Agile is going to be something that our culture and our environment and our governance will allow for us to manage. We've also seen what I call lag teams. You may have multiple Agile teams that have dependencies upon each other. We typically see this in life sciences or other regulatory groups where they have to have an independent quality assurance or testing team come into their ERP environment and conduct their testing. And so you may have your development or your configuration teams working on business processes, then they promote that to a quality assurance or testing environment, and then the QA teams come in behind it. We manage different backlogs for that work to get completed, but the dependencies are there between them, and it shows how the QA team's work is completed as a one iteration lag behind the configuration and development teams. And then finally, once we get to the point where we can do continuous agile iterations, where we can be planning all of our different tasks and activities through continuous iterations and release management, this is where we have the ability. We have trained folks. We have trained people who understand how to manage the work this way. Sometimes we can do this in smaller projects that have smaller scope and less integration requirements. We also can do this where we may have shorter release cycles. But this also may be something that you eventually take your team and work into. And many of us work in an environment, in an ERP environment, where there are multiple things happening at the same time. And with Agile, there's no difference in that as well. You may have multiple teams. Your teams may be set up in many different ways. You may have a team that's based on order to cash or requisition to check, based on business processes. You may have them based on different technologies or skill sets. You may have them set up in many different ways. You then have to figure out the best way to manage the integration across them, because in an ERP environment, we all know that the thing that's going to be the biggest challenge for us is managing that integration and the dependencies. So what we do is individual Scrum teams can be working on their individual projects, but at some point we integrate that information into an integration layer, or a scrum of scrums. And we periodically check in with each other, identify what that looks like, and then continue to work through that. We typically see this in large organizations. I've got one organization that has 18 different Scrum teams, of which 12 of them are SAP related, and then they do have a Scrum of Scrums that meets once a week to define dependencies and integration requirements, as well as open issues and challenges and roadblocks that they're experiencing. So it can be done, and it can be done successfully. Kanban. For those of you that are familiar with some of the lean concepts in your organizations, and you're not quite sure if you're ready for Agile yet, one of the things that we're seeing is organizations and companies starting to introduce the concepts of Kanban. So Kanban really is a technique that can be used that helps you start to identify the overall flow of work within a work stream. And what that does is allows you to visually see where you have constraints and visually see where you have work and being held up. And also you can start to measure the flow and the pace at which work is being completed through a process. Sometimes for people as they're transitioning from a waterfall project into an agile environment, this is a great way for them to start to see where all of the work is being completed. Where is it in requirements definition? Where are we in the configuration steps? Where are we in development? Where are we in testing? And where are we in user acceptance? As we look at that flow of work, how can we start to see where the choke points are? Where do we have constraints in our resources? And how do we continue to identify ways to improve that? So when people consider Agile versus Kanban, eventually you're going to get to the same end state, which may be an optimized process at which your team is becoming high performing and increasing the quality of work and the output at which they're putting out work. However, some people believe that Kanban is a little bit easier for an organization to accept and understand, and where Agile you've got different iterations with shorter periods of time, so there's a little bit of a smoothed out approach with Kanban as you introduce these concepts to your organization. So what does that mean really? If we look at this picture here, we're looking at a process from beginning to end where we go from analysis all the way through release ready, staging, and production. And we're managing all the flow of work. And what we want to see is how does the different components move from the left side to the right side. And so the numbers at the top are your constraints that you have. And for example, we've got a lot of things that are built in development. And our constraint is 4. We typically can only handle 4 items being worked on at one given time in development. And we're starting to see that there's a choke point there that's happening, which is going to start to hold up our testing and our ability to release on time to production. And so how can we identify that? How can we manage our development team so that they are able to manage that work? Also, you can see the pink squares there, which represent issues or blocks that we have. How can we as a management team effectively look at that and remove those blocks as quickly as possible so that the flow of work will continue to happen? Again, here's another view of another Kanban board that we've done, where what you're trying to do is basically maximize the time that you have within your cycle time. And you want to be able to make sure that each of your queues and each of the stages in your process are being optimized. So which ones are empty, and therefore do you have resources that are not being utilized fully, and then which of those other steps have too much in their queue and they can't handle it and they need help. Real quickly, I'd like to talk through one specific customer's experience in introducing Lean and Agile. Orange County Public Schools is an organization that we have worked with. They're an SAP customer. They've been an SAP customer for over 10 years, and they have a full suite of applications that they've implemented there. They also have an active production support team that's actively managing help desk tickets and enhancements and continuous improvement projects. One of the things that they needed to do in this project was introduce a online appraisal process where employees were able to go on and complete performance evaluations and performance appraisals. So we had to introduce the concepts of an enterprise portal, management self-service, and employee self-service, as well as the performance appraisal capabilities. The project team was about 6 weeks behind schedule when we first started, and we had to look at the scope of work, look at the resources that had to get done, resources that were dedicated to the project, and figure out how we can get this project done within the time frame that was given. What we were able to do is we had to work with stakeholders and raise awareness within the organization about what Lean and Agile was. We had to change some of the roles and responsibilities of the people. We had to provide training. And we also had to help everybody through their first awkward use. Every project has this, and it's something that we just have to work through. And it's just how do we transition from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things, not only with our team members, but also with our key stakeholders. We conducted training at many different levels, not only the project team, but also with the key stakeholders, as well as with the executive team. We had to introduce them to new ways of looking at the way we were going to present work and status. We also had to present to them the changes in their roles and how we wanted them to participate. Their participation was going to become more active as this project went on, and we needed to make sure we set those expectations. We had to look at new ways of how we define work and how we present that. So creating a product backlog was one of the first things that we did, and we had many different types of tools and metrics that we were using to manage the progress of the project. But basically, starting a backlog was one of the initial challenges that we had as we defined work. And as I mentioned earlier, for many ERP customers, that's the hardest step. How do I decompose the business process into configuration and development items that still make sense and still are things that my team can deliver within a 4-week period of time? Once you do that, you can assign the values of the work and you start to estimate the capacity at which your team will be able to deliver this work. Here's a picture of their Scrum board that we used in managing the project. As you can see, it's a very visual approach. There's columns that show the flow of work from left to right. You can start to see how there is work that is not complete on the left-hand side, and as you go to the right, you can see where the work is being assigned, who is working on it, and as it gets complete, it goes into the done pile. Within a sprint, we want to see as many of those yellow and blue stickies move to the right, and we can start to measure our progress within a very quick period of time. What this does is it facilitates teamwork and cross-training. Other team members that are on the team, if their work is completed, they can start to see who needs help, who else can I help them, provide my assistance with, and then also people who traditionally may not be working in a specific area will start to learn more, and there's automatic cross-training that happens. So people that are typically a financial person only working on accounts payable or accounts receivable type areas can now start to learn more about possibly what's happening in procurement or in purchasing or in requisitioning, as those team members might need some additional help. Real quick true story on this as well is that this also gives us a very quick snapshot of what our project status is. Many of you may be used to filling out status reports and filling out red light, green light charts for PowerPoint presentations, but once you get your executives and your key stakeholders trained on how to look at this, there's key metrics and there's key ways to demonstrate progress. we were able to take this board and actually just take pictures of it and start to introduce that as a way to show status. What are the key issues? What are the key things that are needing to be worked on, as well as how are we managing the flow of work? The end of the proof of concept, basically we were able to realize a 200% increase in the team's productivity. So we were able to measure how much work the team was completing in the beginning of the project versus how much work they were getting done by the end of the project. So we can almost doubled their capacity at which they were completing work. A lot of people many times ask us, doesn't Agile add the risk of increasing scope if you don't have everything defined up front? And the answer to that question is, yes, you do increase your scope, but what happens is it's better scope. And so many times as we've been in the Waterfall process, we've seen these traditional blueprint workshops where we spend a lot of time up front defining things with a customer that doesn't really know or understand the product, and they don't know or understand the answers to all the questions around the design. Through an iterative prototyping approach, we're able to control the scope better by making it better work. What we're doing is we are eliminating scope that really doesn't need to be done, and we're introducing scope based on specific requirements, based on the prototypes that we continue to deliver and demonstrate. So in this project, we actually had a 20% additional scope added to the project, but we were able to delete 18%, which basically makes it a wash at the end of the day, and the customer ends up with a better product that they know is going to support their stakeholders and that they know is going to deliver the functionality that they're looking for. So overall, this customer specifically was able to realize that increase in productivity, as well as the team members just liked the way that the work was managed. They were able to do things within 1 week that used to take them 3 or 4 weeks. And so we start to eliminate the waste. We start to eliminate the way things are being addressed from an overall process perspective. We get the resources that can conduct the work and get the work done together, and you can streamline the way in which that work is getting completed. Once the customer completed the proof of concept, they were able to look at their overall enterprise and all the different aspects of SAP and the way that they were being managed, and start to introduce new ways of using Lean and using Agile in the way that they managed it. So for example, this customer was able to look at their overall processes, look at the way that they were managing their help desk and their support, and being able to figure out the best way for them to manage that, managing the overall life cycle of their SAP environment. And lastly, as we look at managing these types of projects, there's a lot of different moving parts that you have to manage. And we, over the past 2 years, have been partnered with Rally. And Rally is one of the leading software companies within Lean and Agile management with regards to project and portfolio management. And we have partnered with Rally to jointly invest in looking at the ERP space and looking at how we can introduce these concepts to ERP customers. And we have created a lot of our templates as we go into projects based on the Rally model. So if you take the Agile concepts and you take the different concepts within how we manage a project, we are now able to visualize that by using the Rally tools. And so here's an example of story mapping where we take a business process, we decompose it into epics and stories, and then we're able to take that and show the relationships between the stories within an end-to-end business process. We also, once we're inside the story, are able to use the different components of Rally to be able to show all the different aspects within a traditional ERP project. There's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of requirements, there's a lot of other things that we have to show and demonstrate. There's dependencies. You may have 3, 4 other stories that are all related to the story that you're completing the work on. So how do we identify those dependencies and how do we show that relationship as we are looking at the work that has to be completed? We also have the ability, we get asked questions about requirements traceability. Many times an ERP project starts off with a list of requirements, and the ERP software is asked to deliver capabilities to meet those requirements. How do you provide the traceability back to those requirements throughout the different stages of the life cycle? And in Rally, we're able to show the dependencies and parent-child relationships with many-to-one relationships where we can take a requirement and map it to many stories. So you then have the ability to show the requirements traceability as it's mapped through the entire process. And then at any given point in time, there's many different ways for you to check your status on how you're doing as a team, where you are in your iteration, what does your burn down look like, and how you're able to show outstanding tasks and activities as you look at your sprints. And so you get different types of dashboards and different views in the way that you can manage the work. We've created all of our templates in Rally so that it becomes repeatable. We're able to take our project work streams and break those down, and then we've been able to demonstrate those in Rally. So with that being said, what I'd like to do is one of the key concepts that we've been hearing in a lot of different conversations with ERP customers is, how do I look at this from a different perspective? And Rally's got several tools and several different capabilities that they use to demonstrate that larger enterprise view of these types of programs. So I'd like to hand over the controls right now to Mike McLaughlin, and if you could show everybody a little bit more about how they can leverage Rally.
Great. I appreciate the introduction, Jason. So I'll start by sharing Rally. And by the way, for the folks that have been asking questions in the chat, please continue to do so. We'll have a log of all the questions, and we'll make sure that we get a response and get those back to you. I pulled up Rally on my desktop. Hopefully it's rendering okay on yours. Just a quick observation, you'll notice Rally's delivered software as a service, so it comes with all the benefits of getting a lean solution to help you track your projects. What I'm actually looking at here on this page is a depiction of an example procurement project for an ERP system, where you can see I have my entire project represented, and one of the things Rally really excels at is capturing that entire hierarchy of the entire project and all of the sub-milestones or components, or epics is a term Jason often uses for these, that are used to implement that project. And Rally can take that as many levels deep as makes sense. So I'll dive deeper into the develop epic, and I can see it breaks down further in the forms and reports and so forth. And I can dive in further into that, ultimately down to the stories and even the tasks that the teams or the set of teams will be working on to implement this project. I'll talk more later about some of the tremendous benefits that'll have for your organization. So let's take a team perspective now. Jason was talking about this idea of teams having their backlogs and about the importance of making sure they're not only value-focused, but also consider that the stories need to be in the right sequence and groomed just in time to make sure the teams have enough runway to plan their upcoming work. So I'm looking at a team's backlog, and as a product owner, I would have responsibilities over this, working with the team to understand the size and the nature of the stories, to understand the order we should put them in. You'll notice that I've specifically called out this idea of seeing predecessors and successors to help us manage those sequences so I can build a plan that we can confidently go forward with. You'll also notice that several of the artifacts in this list don't currently have sizes to them. And one of the things Jason mentioned earlier was this idea of one of the benefits of taking Agile approach is this idea of doing better estimating. So PMBOK has research out there that shows over tens of thousands of data points that IT professionals are inherently optimistic in our estimates. So what happens is when you start aggregating many, many optimistic estimates, you end up with really optimistic plans. In Agile, what we like to take advantage of is we're actually really good at doing relative estimation. So that is, I don't know how much a horse weighs, but I know it weighs more than a dog and less than an elephant. Well, we have similar patterns with software and configurations and things that are similar to things we've done before. So as we start doing these relative sizing exercises, you can use techniques such as what I'm demonstrating, where I know this is smaller than some items over here and larger than some items over there. And I could size a number of these items as a team to come to consensus over what size we believe it is. So now let's assume we have a fully groomed backlog, and we are entering into one of our planning meetings. And the mode I'll demonstrate this afternoon is this idea where we have a set of upcoming time boxes, and we have our groomed backlog over here on the left-hand side. And I want to, as a team, as a self-organizing, self-managing team, working with our product owner who's created the order in which we should deliver stuff, begin building out our plan. And you'll notice that Rally's giving me this feedback as to whether this is a realistic plan or an overly ambitious plan. So maybe in this case, I might want to back this work out, maybe break it into smaller pieces if possible, or plan it for a later date. So a great question might be, so how do you know how much work you can plan within a 2, 3, or 4 week period of time? Well, the answer is at first you don't know. So you don't know the answer to that. So you do what you've always done, and you do capacity-based planning, similar to, I'm sure, how many of you are working today. But one of the beauties of Agile is as you work in these 2, 3, or 4 week periods of time, we can measure what teams get done. So here's an example where I have a team that's got a couple calculations of what they've gotten done. So I feel pretty good that they can take on roughly 15 units worth of aggregate size of the work that they're going to take on. So I might build their plan out to accomplish that. One of the neat things I've seen working with customers that are new to this concept is as they begin getting data about how much they can accomplish over these sprints or iteration time boxes, and then they inspect and adapt and look at their upcoming plans, they look like what I'm showing here, where we see a lot of red, and we start seeing that, hey, we've been counting what you can get done over this period in the past, and based on what you've done in the past tells us what you're planning in the future might be overly aggressive. It's a pretty unsettling feeling at first, but when you take a step back and you realize you're getting empirical evidence that tells you that at the rate you've been progressing, maybe this isn't the best plan. So although not the news you may want to hear, the earlier you can get that feedback, the more realistic and the more options you have in building out your plan. So let's take a look at a team using a current plan. Now I'm depicting a team that is working within an iteration and what their work might look like. This could, of course, be a similar view where it could be not bound by time, so it would be more the Kanban approach that Jason was talking about. And so here's a team where they have their work, and as team members, I can call out blocks, such as what you see here. With Scrum Masters, they can help us get those blocks removed. Team members can quickly come in and update the progress on the tasks that they've been working on. So this is a great example where these self-managing teams can quickly update their status and have that visible and seen across the entire organization. And as this team progresses across their sprint, hopefully they're signaling not only completion of the items they're working on, but their product owner is able to quickly give them feedback and hopefully accept that work. While this is all taking place, Rally's got this great view where the team's not only seeing the work they're on, but it's seeing a report helping the team determine as a team if they're going to make their commitment. And one final thing I wanted to point out from the team's perspective is this idea of collaboration. So Rally has this notion of discussion threads, really helping teams, especially if they happen to not be co-located, get some of that additional collaboration amongst the team. Now, another area where Rally really excels is this idea that your projects aren't necessarily delivered by a single team. One thing Rally can do is help organize multiple teams together. And there are many roles where I not only want to see progress for a team, but maybe that same type of progress for multiple teams. This is what I'm depicting here. And then even maybe I don't want to just see it separately for multiple teams, but maybe I want to see a roll-up across multiple teams. Here's an example where I can see a team with a healthy burn chart. I don't have time today to go into details, but maybe in a future session I can. But if I can roll up, Rally can automatically provide that roll-up. And now I can see that same chart, but not just for a single team, but for multiple teams. And in this case, it actually results in a drastically different picture, taking us from where a single team looked like they were ahead of schedule, where the collection of teams looks like we're somewhat behind schedule and maybe to inspect and adapt. And finally, I'll tie us back to that work breakdown structure and that roll-up that Rally can provide, connecting the project all the way down to the task. Earlier, you may not notice, but this procurement project was, I believe, at 21%, but as that team completed and accepted the work on their board, we now notice it's rolled up to 25%. And the epics that are used to implement this particular project, I can see them rolling across their own value stream and see their own progress bars and how they're connected. And one of the really cool things here is I love to ask my customers, how many things, whether it's projects or epics or whatever the right label is, how many are you concurrently working on at any given time? And the fascinating thing is usually most of them give me multiple answers because they struggle seeing that and they lack the visibility. This is a really powerful way to get that visibility, to see exactly what's going on, to be able to roll that information up or drill down accordingly depending on what it is you are trying to accomplish. And then the final view I'll show before I open it back up for Q&A, is this idea that Rally can also take this one step further and really map out these epics or projects or whatever level and label is appropriate over a calendar and build plans that you can track to and report and make completely transparent and visible to your organization. So with that, I'm going to quit sharing and pass it back to Jason and Lauren.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. I'm going to go through these slides. These slides will be our screenshots of what Mike just showed you, and they'll be available in the deck that you get access to after the call. So what I'd like to do is open it up questions and answers. And I've been watching the chat here for the past few minutes, and there's a couple things that I'd like to go over. We have about 5 minutes left before the hour, so I will go through what I can in the 5 or so minutes that we have. There's a few themes that I've grouped together here. One of the questions that came in had to do with how our teams are formed, and there are some people that are typically used in a support role, and there are other people who are used in a capacity of maybe a core development or core configuration. The answer to your question is basically that we've seen teams created in multiple different ways. Many times there are the same people that wear multiple hats. They may wear 2 or 3 hats where they're doing business operations, they're doing ERP design work, and they're doing testing and support and help desk. The key to being successful is how you define the work. If you define the work from a project perspective or an enhancement perspective or a help desk ticket perspective, you want to align your resources that aligns with the work. So that being said, you have to be able to define how many hours within a day or how many hours within a week are dedicated to be able to support that project. One of the key things that we want to do is be able to predict our capacity and be able to predict our performance. And we need to do that with some fixed variables. Therefore, if you have somebody working on multiple things, and we've had this work with some customers, they may say, there are 3 hours of the day where they're dedicated to working on the project, 3 hours of the day they're working on help desk support, and the other 2 hours they're working on other business-related activities. Therefore, we have the ability to plan 3 hours towards this specific project, and we're able to manage that capacity. So it depends on, I think, how your resources are managed and how they're set up. There were a couple questions regarding how you manage projects with regards to contracts. How do you manage the fixed price versus time and materials? How do you manage some of the milestones that you're looking at? Typically, we go into these projects just like you would plan any other project. The acquisition process as well as the contracting process should be the same. However, you can create SLAs and you can create milestones that incent both the customer as well as the vendor or the partner in managing to an agile delivery model. With that being said, there's ways for you to accelerate delivery, there's ways for you to accelerate benefits, and what we've done and what we've seen in some of our contracts is whether it's fixed price or whether it's time and materials, we create risk rebates. And those rebates are incentives to be able to complete work early. Because we have to remember that it takes both the customer as well as the contractor to be able to get the work completed. And we can coach and help entice people to get their work done earlier. But so we basically price them out the same as we would a regular project, but we create rebates and incentives for us to be able to get the work completed sooner. There's a couple questions about how do you get started in looking at the work with regards to user stories, and I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. Typically what we see is as people start to think about their work differently, how do they think about an integration testing scenario or a user acceptance scenario? And you want the ability to be able to look at what is it that I'm going to deliver at the end of the day. And then, for example, I want the ability to approve a purchase order over the internet using a automated workflow. And if that's your end user test, what are the 5 or 6 things or 10 things or 20 things that you have to do in order to conduct that story? And so you may have to do some configuration of workflow items. You may have to do some setups on purchasing rules. You may have to do some technical development to get some of those workflow objects created. Those are the 10 or 15 things that you have to do. Those become your stories underneath that epic, or they become the tasks and activities under that story. That's what goes into your backlog. Also, there was a question about SAP integration with Solution Manager and Rally. Rally and Genesis are in conversations with that exact topic. We have been trying to find a test case or a client that would be willing for us to work with us in helping develop that. But there are definitely ways to streamline testing. There's definitely ways to streamline the work that has to be completed, and as well as how do you manage the configuration items back and forth between Solution Manager and Rally. So that is definitely a concept that we are working on. Another question was the definition of done. The definition of done is a little bit different, I think, in an ERP project. An ERP project, it's not necessarily about getting to production. For us, what we've seen is that it's about getting to a quality assurance environment. How can I do the configuration and the development that's required in order to get to production, or get to quality assurance so that I can conduct an integration test? You have to remember, ERP is all about integration. It's about dependencies. It's about getting work completed without sacrificing or compromising the integrity of the work that's been done before or other areas of the ERP product. And so we have to maintain that integrity. We do that by maybe having a separate iteration or sprints dedicated to integration testing and regression testing that is done before we go to production. So we just have to look at our work differently than we would in a normal project, and we have to group it into iterations that we're going to deliver. I am looking at the clock, and it's about 2 minutes over the time. So what I'd like to do is I've captured a lot of your questions here in the chat room. I'd like to thank you for all of your input there. But before we leave, we are planning to have a second webinar. It's a part 2. We've had a significant amount of interest into this webinar. And what we're trying to do is tailor that to some of the topics that you may be interested in. So what you'll see before you is a poll that is asking for what are some additional topics as we go down to the next layer and we want to share some thoughts and ideas with how you get started on your next ERP Agile project. What are some of the areas that you want for more information? Is it about success stories? Is it how to assess your Agile readiness? How to manage your backlog? How do we conduct activities around looking at the scope of our work by using story mapping? Release planning? Do you want more information on Kanban and how to manage the flow of work? How do you manage distributed teams? That's significant. That's a big question we get all the time. There's different ways that we're going to estimate work by using Lean and Agile. How can we, as project managers or stakeholders, do a better job at estimating? Measuring and reporting. How can we look at, spend more time about some of the metrics and the way that we report out to our executives and to our stakeholders the progress of our Agile projects? So if you can take a few minutes and select, I don't know, 2, 3 of those topics, we will tailor the next webinar to cover those areas. All right, it looks like the poll has kind of slowed down. Thank you for your input on that. And then as we close out, what I'd like to share with you is that there are additional ways for you to continue to get more information. As I just mentioned, there will be a part 2 to this webinar. It's scheduled right now for April 18th at 1 o'clock, the same time that we had this one today. And some of the topics that we have planned, as well as whatever feedback you just gave us, will be included in that webinar. And basically the intent there is to go down to another level of detail. Today was just some of the high-level concepts, and then how do we now get into more detail. There will be an invitation that will be sent to everybody that participated in this webinar, and you can respond to that, or you can send an email to the email address that you see there. Genesis will also be having an Agile workshop for ERP customers. It's located in Denver, Colorado on April 25th. And what we're going to be doing is doing actual hands-on activities and simulations and taking real live ERP projects and helping customers figure out how to get started. And so you can get more information by sending an email to the email address that's listed there. And then finally, for those of you who are SAP customers, we will be having a pre-conference workshop at the Orlando area on May 13th, which is the day before the actual conference starts. It will be a free seminar to SAP customers, and basically we will have different topics and concepts that we will discuss. There will be some hands-on exercises and simulations as well, and there will be a networking reception to meet other SAP customers who have been practicing Lean and Agile practices in their projects. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, and Lauren, if you want to wrap it up.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we hope to see you again at the same time on April 18th for our second webinar. Have a great day.